next up is Jamie Janover. So I will quickly read Jamie's bio. Jamie Janover has long been interested in the intersection of science and all things considered spiritual and metaphysical. So when he first came across Nassim Haramein lecturing at a music festival, all the dots connected. Ever since that time, in the summer of 2002, he has been delving ever deeper into the world of unified physics and ancient cultures through the lens of Nassim Haramein's theories, sharing resonant information in presentations he delivers while on tour as a musician. Jamie Janover was taught by Nassim Haramein how to deliver presentations on his unified field theory in 2008 as one of the Resonance Project's original 12 emissaries. In 2012, he became the Resonance Project first ambassador and took over for Nassim in teaching 3-day delegate programs, which have since become an online intensive course with thousands of students from 77 countries all over the world. Janover has delivered more than 250 comprehensive presentations and a dozen delegate program weekends on Nassim's work at private events, conferences, and festivals worldwide in places as far-reaching as New Zealand, Egypt, India, Canada, Indonesia, Spain, Costa Rica, Australia, Portugal, Mexico, and all across the United States of America. Welcome, Jamie. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here with you guys.
I will pass the baton over to you, and we'll see you in a bit.
Right on. Neil, do you want to do this interview style at all, or do you just want me to present?
Hey, brother, yeah, if you could present. I just have background noise right now, so I just figured it would be better if you presented.
Okay.
Yeah, do you have the slides, right? We discussed via email?
Yeah, I can share screen.
Okay.
So here we go, everybody. How's it going? I'm going to just
sorry
kind
to
of
interrupt there, Jamie. If there's any questions that pop up, I'll jump in and I'll ask you those.
Okay. All right, let me get Keynote going here. And all right, you guys seeing my space? You guys seeing that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's on.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to try to do a very condensed, brief version of what can be an extended set of information, because what we're trying to review here is the history of civilization and the history of science, of trying to figure out where we are, how we got here, what everything's made of, where everything's going. And those are the giant questions that everybody's been asking since we evolved to the point of having a consciousness that allows us to ask these questions. So that being said, it's kind of an infinite amount of information, and I have 40 minutes. So this is the super speed dial version, condensed version of a presentation that I actually have on Portal to Ascension, Space-Time Geometry in Ancient Civilizations. And just right away, just by saying that, you have to say, okay, what do you mean space-time geometry? You mean there's a thing called space-time? What is that? And then there's geometry, which is the study of the structure in space. So space-time geometry would suggest that there's a structure to space, that it's not just random, or it's not just nothing. Because I think when most people think of space, and you look up at the sky at night or even the daytime, there's a lot of space out there, right? We look up and we see all these stars. People were like, what is all that? Where did that come from? Where am I, right? And since those questions started being asked, there's been a divergence, right? There was the main way of knowing things, which was fundamentally spiritual or religious or philosophical. I don't know how all this stuff got here, but my guru or my leader or my authority figure or my parents or whoever it is, when you're a kid, say, here's the deal. This is how things work. And then a long time later, we invented the scientific method, which was a little bit more like, I don't know. And instead of guessing or having faith in some description that I got from somebody who lived before me, maybe I'll try to figure this out. I'll collect some data. I'll have a hypothesis. I'll compare my data to my hypothesis. Scientific method in a nutshell, right? So once we got to that point, then people like Copernicus and Galileo looked into the sky and said, hold on a second, how can this be all happening like this? I don't understand the stories. How is everything connected? Where did all this stuff come from? And so you can ask this question: if there was one thing that connected all the things, what would it be? The short answer to that is space. And people think of space, I think, usually as outer space. Obviously, space is everywhere. Even at the quantum scale, space is there. The material world, everything we call matter, is made of atoms. We've never found any matter not made of atoms, and atoms are made of mostly space, a vast majority space. So if you want to try to figure out how everything in the universe works, you might want to pay attention to the space and how that all connects. And is there any way to describe this space? Is it random? Does it have a structure? Does it have a dynamic? Does it have a density? Does it have a pattern of energy flow? So this is where you can start to like get down to the nitty gritty, right? This guy, Henrik Casimir, it's actually not Henrik Casimir, found out in 1947 or something, very decades ago, maybe space has a structure to it. Maybe space has an energy to it. And so there was a theory that if you took two finely polished plates, so finely polished you could get them a micron apart from each other, you could effectively stop all of the long frequencies of the electromagnetic spectrum from getting between these plates. It's a very simplified short description of an experiment that couldn't even physically be done when he thought of this. It wasn't until 1990 at Seattle University that they managed to do an experiment like this with a ball and a plate. Long story short, energy is not empty. Space is not empty. Space is completely full of energy of all kinds of different frequencies of the electromagnetic spectrum, not to mention things like muons, just like tiny little particles that fly through space. Right now, as we sit here, there's television stations, radio stations, all these different frequencies of the electromagnetic spectrum passing through us. And we don't really perceive very much of that because we can only perceive 1/10 billionth of the information riding on the electromagnetic spectrum. So we did a lot of experiments. A lot of different physicists kind of evolved their thinking on how the universe works. Eventually you get to Wheeler, Thorne, and Meissner writing this book, Gravitation, in the 70s. And this kind of became the Bible of Einstein's field equations, because Einstein is kind of the father of gravity, the father of space-time. He had the profound insights onto the nature of space-time and thinking about space-time as a fabric that might curve and all this stuff. Fast forward through a lot of description that I don't have time to get to. There's a physicist named Nassim Haramein who looked at Einstein's field equations and said, I think there's something missing here. Let me dig into this further. And so, man, to try to encapsulate this problem. Okay, physicists looked at space. They said, is there energy? Yes. How much energy is there? There's so much energy that it's almost an infinite amount of energy. And the physicists went, oh no, we can't just come out and say there's an infinite amount of energy in space and it's everywhere. We're going to sound like a mystic. We're going to sound like a spiritual being or a religious person. We don't want to do spiritual. We want to do science. So we need to like make it finite. We can't just have infinities and all this stuff. Infinite times infinite is infinite. I mean, that's kind of how it is, but physics needs numbers. They're like, okay, it's not an infinite amount of energy. Let's just like say it's a lot of energy. It's really, really, really full of energy, but it's not infinite. So we're going to round it off. That's what this renormalization is here on this slide. They basically rounded off infinity and said, okay, that's full enough. We'll just say that it's, really full. It's actually 10 to the 93 grams per cubic centimeter. And that is such a ridiculously large number, you guys. You can't really even think of it because it's a 1 with 93 zeros after it. Imagine if your bank account had 93 zeros on it, right? This is exponential growth. Every time you add a zero onto a number, it's 10 times bigger. 10 to the 93 grams is so dense in terms of the amount of energy per cubic centimeter that if you took all the regular matter of the universe, the stars, the planets, the gases, the asteroids, and you squashed it all into a cubic centimeter of space, the density of that cubic centimeter would only be 10 to the 55 grams. So right away, most all of us should be really confused right now. Like, what? The whole universe in a cubic centimeter is 10 to the 55? And you're telling me empty space is actually 39 orders of magnitude denser than squashing the whole universe into a cubic centimeter? Apparently, that's what's happening here, that space is actually infinitely full, basically, of energy, and that matter is kind of a specific vibration that happens inside this medium that we call space that has had so many names over such a long time. They used to call this field that we're talking about, that is space, the ether. And the ether was super magical sounding. And so right after Einstein came along, scientists, physicists, they got rid of the ether because, again, it was kind of too mystical. It was a little too magical for them. And they wanted to make this more finite. Now, Nassim looked at these densities, he looked at these structures of space at all scales. This is the most mathematic kind of chart that I'm going to show this whole time, but it's an important scale, a chart that shows the scaling law of all organized matter from the smallest thing that we can measure to the largest thing. And that's the Planck's distance, the Planck length, the smallest little oscillations of space that happen and build things like protons, all the way to the observable universe where we can't see past a certain threshold because the light is moving away from us as far as we can tell. Might be an illusion. This is the Big Bang in a nutshell, right? There was nothing. There was all of a sudden a singularity that is an infinitely small point in space. How that got there, every kid will ask you. No scientist and no theologian can answer that question, right? There was nothing, apparently, as far as we can tell. There was then a singularity, and then that thing blew up into a giant explosion, which somebody sarcastically called the Big Bang, and that name stuck. And that's where we still are in terms of our cosmology, that space started forming, and then it got bigger and bigger, like somebody blowing up a balloon. And now we see these galaxies moving away from us, and that's the observable universe. Well, inside that scale, there are these structures that appear at different sizes, and they clump around these various sizes. For example, things like atoms. There's not a lot of structure between an atom and, say, a molecule. And there's not a lot of structure between a molecule and a biological organism, like an animal. And there's not a lot of structure between things that are the size of animals and trees and things like that, and moons or comets or planets. And then there's another big jump to stars. And then there's another big jump to galaxies. Well, all these things are centered by stillness and have spin going around them. And essentially, they're black holes. And black holes are not just vacuum cleaners that suck things in, they also radiate information. So Nassim Haramein's physics says that a proton is a black hole, a star is a black hole, a galaxy is a black hole, supermassive black hole, right? That keeps the coherency of the smaller black holes that are stars spinning around it. The universe itself is likely a black hole inside of a much larger black hole. So it's scalar dimensions to infinity. And so he started plotting all these and realizing that there are these very specific relationships happening there. So this proves that there has to be structure in space. If there was no structure in space, the universe wouldn't be able to organize itself so incredibly coherently so that there's a linear relationship between the size of a structure and the frequency of its spin or the frequency of its vibration. There's a direct linear relationship between frequency and scale. That's proof there has to be structure or organization in space, because this is the entire structure of space from the smallest to the biggest. So then Nassim's like, okay, what do I figure out? How do I figure out what is that structure of space? It was around this time he went on a vacation to Mexico and he saw this pyramid in Chichen Itza. And looking at this pyramid, you can tell whoever built this was really good at geometry, because not only did they make it perfectly symmetrical and make it very beautiful and have the perfect number of steps that when you add up all the steps plus the top, it adds up to 365, the number of days in the year. In addition to all that, the most difficult thing is to do what you're seeing right here, which is at 5:41 p.m. on the equinoxes, there's a shadow cast by the edge of the pyramid where the sun hits the staircase and it looks like a snake. And they put a snake serpent head at the bottom of the staircase right there. So to do that, you have to know that you live on a sphere, that you go around the sun, that there's an angle to the Earth. You have to know what that angle is. You have to know about precession. You have to know about the equinox. You have to know quite a bit of astrophysics type information, more than you would probably be able to gather from putting a stick into the ground and looking at the shadow and all these kinds of theories that come up. So then the question is, like, how did they know all these things? Because they started putting pyramids all over the place in Mexico that represent a very specific relationship of geometry. And there's a researcher that came along in the early part of the 1900s, I believe, and started studying Mexico for 30 years, Peter Tompkins. And he wrote this book, The Mystery of the Mexican Pyramids. and showed that the Maya and the Aztecs, the folks that built the original pyramids in Mexico, were trying to show us this relationship between a sphere and a tetrahedron. And the sphere is the most basic form that the universe is making at all scales. Everywhere we look, it's spheres inside of spheres inside of spheres. And the most simple geometry you can make with straight lines, the simplest of the 5 Platonic solids, is a tetrahedron. So there's already an important relationship between these two geometries. If you put a tetrahedron perfectly inside of a sphere, it's going to intersect that sphere exactly at 19.47 degrees latitude. And by doing that, you've bisected the sphere exactly 2/3 below and 1/3 above. Or the other way, if you put the tetrahedron oriented in the other direction, making a star tetrahedron inside your sphere. So the interesting thing here is that that city, Teotihuacan, is exactly at 19.47 on the sphere of the Earth. And no, the Earth isn't flat. No matter how much it seems like it's flat and people have perceptions of things being flat, if you were a bacteria on a bowling ball, you might think the bowling ball is flat also, because it's a scale relationship that causes that illusion. I just need to throw that out because there's a lot of misinformation about the flat Earth thing, and I am not one of those folks. I will go on the record saying that the universe is hollow fractographic. In other words, the universe is making spheres inside of spheres. There is no such thing as flat. There is no flat. Even the flattest thing you can see, if you put an electron microscope up to it, you'll notice it's made of atoms, and atoms are not flat. So therefore, the idea of 2D, the idea of flat, is an idea of human beings, not an idea of the universe. Anyway, to move on, the biggest mountains that we find on our planet are 19.47, like Mauna Kea in Hawaii, the biggest mountain on our planet, which is actually taller than Everest if you measure to the seafloor. And then Olympic Mons in Mars, the largest volcano in our solar system, is at 19.47. The big red dot on Jupiter is at 19.47, and it's been there since we invented the telescope over 350 years ago. So we know it's foundational. We also even see increased sunspot activity on the sun at 19.47. So we know there's an important relationship between the sphere and the tetrahedron. We also have these anomalous activities that happen at that latitude. Especially known is the Bermuda Triangle, next most known as Devil's Triangle. Notice there's a triangle off the west coast of Australia. Isn't there a plane that we're still looking for right over there that we couldn't find? The biggest mystery of all time, biggest search in the history of human beings. Yeah, it's in the middle of that triangle. So that could be a coincidence, but we see commonalities of this angle and of this latitude in fundamental relationships in physics that hold true anywhere you are in the universe. For example, a wake, whether you're going through air or water, happens at this 19.47 degree angle, no matter what speed you're traveling. So Nassim started looking into this because tetrahedrons are so foundational. Maybe tetrahedrons have something to do with the geometry of space. And sure enough, they do. I mean, Buckminster Fuller was a huge pioneer in this work, and he figured out that there has to be structure that has to be perfectly balanced, that is creating a tensegrity grid, if you will, in the field of space. And so Buckminster Fuller came up with this figure right here known as the isotropic vector metric. And it's 20 tetrahedrons making a larger tetrahedron, which is very equal and opposite. It's very balanced, but it's not perfectly balanced because there's structures in the middle that don't have a counterbalance unless you take another tetrahedron and you put it into the first tetrahedron. When you do this, your 20 tetrahedrons in each combine, and you get this 40 tetrahedrons making a star tetrahedron. This is balanced and equal and opposite. This might be a theorized structure to space-time itself, because here's the thing. How is space completely full, but we perceive it as empty? Like, I can move my hand, and yeah, I know I'm in atmosphere. I can feel the air if I move my hand fast enough. But if I was in between galaxies and I moved my hand, would I feel anything? Is there a viscosity to that? Is there an energy density to that? We already know it's completely full, but it doesn't feel like it. It feels like there's nothing. That's got to be one of the biggest anomalies in the history of physics. And the only explanation that really makes a lot of sense, the most sense, is that the structure of the space is so perfectly balanced, so equal and opposite in every possible way, that no matter where a force is in that structure, there's an equal and opposite structure in the space itself that counterbalances that force, and all forces counteract each other into what you would call a 0-point field, otherwise known as the ether, the plenum, Space, the vacuum. You could call it God. You could call it mana, prana, chi, quantum foam, source field. Call it whatever you like. There's this one field that connects everything, and we call it space most commonly. And that one thing is what all matter rises out of, all forces rise out of, all perception rises out of, consciousness itself rises out of. And so this is perhaps alluding to the structure itself. And this is, simplified, right? There's no lines in space. There's no tetrahedrons being made in space. Kind of like when you look at a Nautilus shell, there's the spiral. It has an underlying geometry of phi triangles that kind of organize that spiral. You don't see the triangles, you just see the curves. In the same way, you don't see the geometry of space, you see spheres being made. And all these spheres perfectly packing together, if you put all the spheres around each one of these tetrahedrons, they perfectly pack together. And it creates a grid that is the fundamental pattern of the universe. Inside of a tetrahedron, a star tetrahedron, those gaps that were in one isotropic vector metric meet the other and come together to form this geometry in red, what Buckminster Fuller coined as the cube octahedron or the vector equilibrium. And this is the only 3D geometry that's in a perfect balanced state where all the lines, all the vectors from the center to the edge are the same length as all the edges. And so this gives you a sense of how you would get perfect balance, but this is just one octave. Now we need to have that structure go infinitely bigger and infinitely smaller. So if you start packing more tetrahedrons onto this thing, and you add 4 more tetrahedrons to each of the 8 points, and you add 24 more tetrahedrons, you get to this, which is a 64 tetrahedron grid. This is the first octave of what becomes infinite octaves of perfectly balanced vectors or perfectly balanced geometry. You get a cube octahedron inside of a cube octahedron. Just like in music, you have a note, you go up 7 notes and your 8th note is the octave where you started. This is an analogous pattern happening in the structure of space, where you have a pattern and you have 7 more that go around it and you get to an octave, and now you've got the same structure repeated exactly twice as big. So once you keep on packing these over and over on top of each other, then you get to 512, and it keeps going and it keeps going infinite. And so this is the fundamental tetrahedral array that makes the structure of space-time itself. This is a way of looking at this, like I was describing a moment ago here, about the octavization of frequency and vibration in music, and then the octavization of geometry happening in the structure of space. Again, this is the theory developed by physicist Nassim Haramein, and his foundation is called the Resonance Science Foundation. And if you want to dig deeper into all of this stuff, you guys, you can take a free course that's available right now at resonancescience.org. And it encapsulates Nassim Haramein's lifetime's worth of discovery and exploration into these fundamental relationships in the structure of space-time. And he's developed a unified field theory that really encompasses all the observations that we make, showing that there is a connection between gravity and the rest of the forces. In physics right now, the most accepted theory is called the standard model of physics, which is great at describing the particles and their relationship, but gravity is not included. And that's very important, obviously. This theory that Nassim has developed includes gravity. It explains this mysterious thing that we call dark matter, which I don't know if I'll have enough time to go into. But long story short is dark matter is not really a thing. They think it's a type of matter that they just invented out of thin air that they needed to invent to fix problems in the standard model of physics. But I think the problem, and this is where Nassim goes deep into it, is that renormalization of the vacuum energy, that rounding off of infinity, is why they think that they need dark matter and why they think there's extra mass around galaxies holding them together so they don't fling apart. And that is a fundamental problem that they've basically gotten rid of the energy density of the fabric of space. And then they scratch their head and wonder why 95% of the universe is missing. It's a big issue, you guys. Physics right now is pretty good at describing about 4 to 5% of the universe. The another 95% is missing. And instead of going back and saying, man, maybe our equations were wrong, maybe we're a little off about this, maybe we shouldn't invent a new type of matter, maybe we shouldn't just invent forces out of thin air like the strong force that holds protons together. Maybe that's not the way to go. Nassim calls it physics as you go. As it turns out, the strong force is actually just good old regular gravity. And it doesn't seem like regular gravity because this is gravity acting at the quantum scale, dealing with black holes that are the size of protons, spinning at the speed of light, causing mass dilation to happen. So the mass goes through the roof because you're spinning at the speed of light. Thank you, Einstein. And that's the strong force. So Nassim is basically tied together a unified field theory that describes gravity and electromagnetism and gravity and how they all relate, and tying together the math of the big stuff, cosmological sized math, that's Einstein's field equations, and then the math for the small stuff, which is not the same as the math for the big stuff. When they applied Einstein's field equations to quantum particles, didn't work out. So now we have a theory that encompasses all space, from infinitely big to infinitely small, all forces, gravity, electromagnetism, and actual unification in physics, the thing that Einstein worked on until he died. An infinite tetrahedral array has the geometry of expansion, eight tetrahedrons pointing out is a star tetrahedron, and the geometry of contraction, gravity, 8 tetrahedrons pointing in gives you the vector equilibrium or the cuboctahedron. And so this infinite tetrahedral array, which is really infinite sphere packing, when you put a sphere around each one of these tetrahedra, then you get the fabric of spacetime. This fabric of spacetime is not flat. We shouldn't be showing kids this picture anymore because no, the Earth isn't flat. Spacetime isn't flat like a trampoline where the moon is falling into this thing. That is super simplified. We're flattening the description of spacetime. Black holes are not just a funnel with no equal and opposite structure. Black holes don't just curve. Einstein said spacetime curves, but this is where Nassim was like, what about the spin? Every single thing in the whole universe from the infinitely small to the infinitely large is spinning. So why aren't you saying that spacetime curls like water going down the drain? When you pull your plug in the bathtub, the water doesn't go straight down. There's a change of density, right? The air goes down and spins in one direction, and or the water goes down and spins one direction, and the air goes up and spins in the equal and opposite direction. And this is what happens with space-time and black holes. This is why everything is spinning from the infinitely large, from the universe down to the Planck, which is the tiniest little vibration of the electromagnetic spectrum. 10 to the 60 Planck spherical units make up a single proton, one with 60 zeros after it. And this perhaps is the geometry and the dynamic of the atom, of the magnetic field of the Earth, of the sun, of the galaxy, of the supercluster, of the universe itself. It turns out that space-time curls like water going down the drain. Then it goes out along the equator. It goes in every direction, but more concentratedly along the equator of the structure. And then it curls back in. Just like stars get flung out to the edge of the galaxy, then they get caught into the halo of the galaxy by the magnetic field of the supergiant black hole in the center of the galaxy, and then they come down back to the center of the galaxy and get flung out again. And we've seen stars make this path in our own galaxy. We now have confirmed, and this is, 20 years after Nassim predicted this, that there's a supermassive black hole in the center of the galaxy. So all this comes together in this unified field theory. I don't have time to go into all of the details, but here's some torus images to give you a sense of that dynamic of the infinite in and the infinite out at the same time. This is the fundamental pattern of the universe. This is what you're doing right now, whether you know it or not. The energy field of our bodies, of the magnetic resonance coming from our heart and from our brain, this is a field that we hold, that the Earth holds. And as things spin, there's a Coriolis effect where things on the surface then spin. And so this is endemic to all space-time, spinning vortices with smaller vortices spiraling off of them in a kind of a hologram, a holofractographic or a holofractal structure that we call space-time. We see it in 100-kilometer across structures like hurricanes. We see it in 100 light year across structures called galaxies. We see it in 100 micron across structures like the energy field surrounding a carbon particle. This is the fundamental pattern that we see being mimicked by nature at all scales. We see it in turbulence. We see it in algae blooms. We see it in space-time in the form of our galaxy spinning with these arms. Our sun is in about a third or 2/3 of the way out, and we're in between arms, and we're moving as we go, and the sun is moving through the galaxy, and the planets are spinning around the sun as the sun is moving. So the Earth is actually making a helix path as we travel through space-time, the same pattern as the DNA molecules that encode all of our genetic information throughout our genealogy and our ancestry. This is a short animation from that movie Thrive that Nassim Haramein is featured in the beginning of the movie, talking about this pattern of the stars traveling into the halo of the galaxy back down to the center. So basically everything is centered by stillness, everything is centered by singularity, everything is a black hole. The sun is not just sitting there with the planets spinning around it. The sun is moving through space, and Nassim had to make this very simplified animation about 17 years ago or something now, and it's obviously not this simple. The planets don't move at a 90-degree angle to the sun. It's a 60-degree angle. Each orbit of each planet is a different size. It should be more like this. Other people have taken this animation and built upon it. I think this one was made by DJ Sadhu on YouTube and was inspired by Nassim's animation, and he improved upon it. It's funny to me that we can make that movie Avatar, and yet it's not common practice to show all kids in like preschool, hey, here's the local dynamics of your environment, just so you know, this is what's happening. You're on this planet right here, and we're going around like this. We're still showing kids a model of the sun, and that like, oh, I'm 10 years old, so I went in 10 circles. Be like Groundhog Year. We shouldn't simplify things like this for the kids anymore. I think the kids are ready to get the real picture, a much more clear and ornate and detailed view where things aren't flattened anymore for them. They can understand dynamics, they can understand spin, they can understand that there's a pattern to the geometry between Earth and Venus over an 8-year period, which is what we're seeing right here. So fundamental patterns, fundamental geometries are created by these spheres and the interaction, like the music of the spheres, right? Now we know that there are these massive bubbles of energy coming out of the central black hole of our galaxy. So here's the dual torus. I thought it was really cool that NASA somehow chose the same color as Nassim's animation from 15 years earlier. That was nice, thank you. And isn't it cute that the galaxy looks like your baby picture? We started out as a sphere, and then you become 2 spheres, and you're literally a dual torus. One hemisphere is spinning like this, one hemisphere is spinning like this. And then you divide, and your cells eventually become 64 cells after they're 4 cells initially, and you have a tetrahedral bond between them. Then you're 64 cells, and you are a cuboctahedron, or you are the vector equilibrium. This shows you this relationship of the spheres and the tetrahedrons. It's not easy to see in a simple 2D picture, but this one's nice because it shows the spirals going out in equal and opposite directions, and where they overlap, you get the nodes of the star tetrahedron. That's kind of a nice sealing together the static line geometry that doesn't actually exist, but is the underlying pattern with which the spin and the spirals are organizing themselves. So you have to really think of it as bubbles, as tetrahedrons with spheres around it. And when you get to see that like this is from Marshall Lefferts, the guy who did the book Cosmometry, and he's one of the Resonance Academy faculty members. This shows you the vector equilibrium, the lines. It shows you the torus, the green sphere, and it also shows you the accretion disk, the equivalent of an accretion disk in a galaxy, the plane along the equator of the dynamic where there's more concentrated energy, all in one image. And then you can say that a tree is actually a dual torus, and you're only seeing one half of this. And the quote here from Nassim, which is, biology is the feedback mechanism for the universe to learn more about itself, which is a powerful way of visualizing yourself. Because guess what? We are the universe telling the universe more about itself right now, just by doing this, just by you learning, just by us taking in information. We're the feedback mechanism to make more structure, more organization as time goes on. Biology changes stuff a little bit more quickly than geology or cosmology. And I'm talking all biology, right? From the microorganism to the dinosaur. Doesn't matter the scale, doesn't matter what planet we're talking, all biology. Now we're starting to get into it, right? All these spheres around all these tetrahedrons is making this fundamental pattern, and this dynamic we can see, and these structures we can see in biology all the way to cosmology. So sometimes large cosmological structures look like biological structures, and the overlapping of cells, the organization of our cells is happening in the structure of space, which is fundamentally tetrahedral array, which is spheres overlapping, the flower of life. That symbol that you've seen everywhere, from Coldplay albums now in the mainstream to ancient civilizations, like on the side of a 67-ton megalithic granite pillar in the Osirian temple in Abydos in Egypt, that pattern is everywhere. And nature is mimicking those flows and these geometries, and water is part of the key to this, because the water molecule, especially when it freezes, gives you a clue as to this geometry. And water molecules perfectly packed together are tetrahedral in their lattice. So I'm just showing some examples of the fractal structures here of nature. This is what the ancient civilizations built upon in their architecture. And these fundamental patterns happen often having to do with ratios, like the phi ratio 1.618, the golden mean. This is Rafael Araujo's brilliant work. He's an architect who started to analyze nature and try to show the underlying geometries of how nature builds itself. And now we're adapting this to our technology and doing things like solar arrays that adopt the same field patterning as fundamental nature patterns. And here we are seeing cymoglyphs, which are still images of cymatics, which is making frequency and vibration visible. And it shows similar patterns to sacred architecture that we find in Catholicism, in Aztec, in Egyptian, in Hindu. It even looks similar to the CERN particle accelerator and a top-down view of DNA molecules. So we see fundamental field patterning looking self-similar, and it goes way back into ancient civilizations. This is a 3,000-year-old set of platonic solids found, I believe, in Scotland. So the ancients knew about this fundamental pattern. This fundamental pattern can come out of what we call Metatron's cube, which is 13 spheres, a center sphere with 12 others around it, 12 around one, which is very highly symbolic in ancient civilizations and even in the Bible. And if you connect the centers of all these spheres, emerging out of it comes what are called the platonic solids, the 5 regular solids, where each side is the same and each vertex is the same angle. And we've only found 5 of them, although Michael Evans, kudos to him, the 3-sided platonic solid, not straight lines, but curved, right? It's a single point and then 3 lines that then join. So it's like a petal. It's the petal that forms when you overlap spheres around each other. So it might even be more fundamental than these structures. So I think of there being actually 6 platonic solids, even though one of them has curved lines. And you could argue that these actually all have curved lines too. Michael Evans has taken all of these geometries and shown if they breathe out and all the lines curve out, it would have a different structure, a different name, and then they can all curve in. And so these things might breathe in and out. It seems like it does, because there's nothing that seems totally static in the universe anyway. This was written by my friend Marco in Spanish. That's why the cube is in Spanish. And this is showing if you spin a cube, you get the orientation lines of the dodecahedron. So this is fundamental to all structure. Here we have the first image taken of a molecular structure. This was done by IBM, and you can see those are individual atomic bonds happening right there. I have very few minutes left, so I am going to do a quick flash through here to the Great Pyramid, which obviously has a very pronounced
Jamie, just
geometry
real
to it.
quick, brother. You can go a little over because our next guest is not gonna be able to make it.
So how many more minutes?
How much do you want?
Well, I could take up the next speaker's time if that
You
helps you.
can do like 15 minutes because we'll do a little discussion after that.
Okay,
About some other
15 more
stuff.
minutes. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm like, which part of infinity do I cover in 15 minutes? Okay, so ancient civilizations. I'm going to concentrate on Egypt now because I've been there a few times and I'm going back soon. And this is perhaps the most fascinating, most mysterious piece of architecture on the planet. You can put any skeptic standing in front of this thing and be like, okay, is this here? They'll have to be like, yeah. And then you say, okay, how did this get here? Now, all the descriptions that you have from traditional Egyptologists, pretty much every single one doesn't add up. Like I've heard that they said, oh yeah, Khufu built this, the pharaoh, in 20 years because he was, oh, I'm going to be the pharaoh. Well, I better start making my tomb because I want it to be finished before I die. And so they used to say, oh, that was a 20 or 22 year period. Recently, I heard it was a 30-year period. Okay, great. 30 years. Sure. Go on the long side. Okay. How many blocks are there? Roughly 2.3 to 2.5 million. It's hard to estimate exactly. Let's go on the low side, 2.3 million. If you divide 2.3 million blocks divided by the number of days that there are in 30 years, and you divide that by the number of hours, you're basically having to lay a block every few minutes. So how are you carving these blocks, moving these blocks, placing these blocks, aligning these blocks perfectly every few minutes for 30 years until you get to this, where the top block, you guys, the top block is 1 centimeter off the center of the axis of the 13-acre base. And that's after however many thousands of years. The Egyptologists will tell you this is 4,500 years old. And man, that is tough. That is really tough because we don't have very much evidence really to prove that this was a tomb for Khufu. I mean, Khufu's boat is found next to this thing, but Khufu could have been like, I really like the pyramids. let's fix them up, and bury me next to it. I don't think any mummy has ever been found in any pyramid. I mean, some old documentaries show the pyramids, then they show the mummies, and you think the mummies came out of the pyramids. We know the mummies came out of the Valley of the Kings. That's where all the pharaohs are. Oh, look, there's my background. This is a great spot where you can stand on this dune that now, unfortunately, has a restaurant on it. They just built that in the last year. For anybody who hasn't been to Egypt since COVID, they've built a restaurant basically where this picture was taken, where you can see all 9 pyramids on the Giza Plateau. There are the 3 big ones. Then there's the 3 little ones that are off the end of the Menkaure pyramid, the 3rd of the big ones. And then there's actually 3 very, very ruined pyramids over by the Great Pyramid. So you can actually see all 9 pyramids from here. The Great Pyramid, you guys, is not the pyramid on the left. It's mirrored in my background thanks to Zoom. This is the correct orientation that you're seeing on the screen. The middle pyramid looks like it's taller than the Great Pyramid, and it still has those casing stones on the top, but the Great Pyramid is actually taller at 481 feet or 482. No one's exactly sure what used to be on the tip of the Great Pyramid. Here's another shot from near that spot where you can see those smaller ruined pyramids. If you ever get a chance to go to Egypt, you guys, you should definitely go. The Egyptians are awesome folks, and the food is awesome, and it's actually very safe. And it's the most fascinating of all the ancient sites, I think, in the world because of how anomalous it is. Cairo goes right up to the plateau, and then boom, here are these pyramids. You can just get in a taxi from the Cairo airport and go right to the Great Pyramid and walk 200 meters and pay, I think it's $20 now, and you're inside the Great Pyramid in the King's Chamber. It's not difficult. Go to the airport. I'm going to go there pretty soon, I think, TBD exact timing, but
Hey,
the
Jamie.
Great Pyramid is sitting there and it's just begging us to figure out why it's there and why it's that shape. If you put tetrahedrons together, and do I have a 64 tetrahedron grid
Jamie, real
sitting
quick,
around?
brother. You can actually have 20 minutes from now, okay?
20 minutes. Okay, sure. I can chew up as many minutes as you give me. Do I have a 64 sitting here? Seems like all I have right now is a star tetrahedron, but in any case, inside of a 64 tetrahedron grid, you get these faces on the outside where there are these cavities, and the cavities that form in a tetrahedral array are octahedrons, one of the Platonic solids. And a pyramid is not a tetrahedron. It has a four-sided base, not a three-sided base. So this is actually half of an octahedron. It's the resonating cavity of the structure of space-time itself. That could be a coincidence. Anything can be a coincidence. But when all these different things start to line up, the geometries and the technology and the space-time data that we have from recent physics, it starts to paint a picture that ancient civilizations knew the structure of space-time. They knew the geometry. They even may have known the speed of light because the Great Pyramid of Giza's latitude is the speed of light in meters per second. And if you take a circle and you draw it around the base of the Great Pyramid on the outside, and then you inscribe a circle and you put a circle on the inside and you subtract the length of one circle from the other, you get the speed of light again in a vacuum. So they've described the speed of light in a vacuum and in air, both in different metrics within the Great Pyramid. That could be a coincidence, but I highly doubt it. By the way, I was showing you here that the pyramid used to be completely smooth, covered with this alabaster covering, and it got mined off the pyramid, and they used those rocks to make churches and temples in Cairo. We can find some of those stones still in Cairo today. This is the main entrance. It was blown with dynamite by a British researcher, finding these giant chevron rocks. This was the original entrance. The new entrance is that little hole that you go through. This is showing some of the interior of the pyramid. This is where you can see that it was very advanced technology, and it had to have some sort of structure, or it had to have some sort of purpose. Maybe it made energy, maybe it was a water hammer. There's all these different theories, but we don't have evidence that it was a tomb. We don't have evidence that Khufu was buried in here yet, but there have been recent discoveries showing that there's another void above that giant void that's called the Grand Gallery, which is, massive and has steps in it now, but it's an anomalous thing. We don't really know why the King's Chamber is there. We don't know why the Queen's Chamber is there. We don't know why the subterranean chamber is there. This is the only statue ever found of Khufu. This is a slide from the great Graham Hancock. If you're not familiar with Graham Hancock's work, I strongly advise you to dig deep into all of his work and his books and his website. He's been an inspiration. I kind of think of him as being the Nassim Haramein of archaeology, because like Nassim Haramein, Graham is not a PhD in the field that he's studying. He's an independent researcher that looked at the field and said, a lot of stuff that you guys are saying doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'm going to dig into this. And so Graham started with the sign and the seal and wrote about the search for the lost Ark of the Covenant. And that opened up the floodgates, because then he started to have to say, well, now I have to look at the Sphinx. I have to look at the Great Pyramid. Why would Khufu only have a 4-inch statue of himself and not say, oh yeah, by the way, I built this, and put his name on the pyramid? There's no hieroglyphs on the pyramid, even though there's hieroglyphs all over Egypt. And the pyramid is not just 4-sided, it's actually 8-sided. And a gentleman that I work with, one of the Resonance Academy faculty members named Robert Edward Grant, has just come up with a new theory about the angle of this indentation being 0.432 degrees, 432, which shows up all over the place in ancient knowledge and is a very important frequency in vibration and in music. We should be tuning to A432. I should do a whole presentation on that at some point. There's been new discoveries made in frequency and resonance and geometry that shows that 432 is absolutely fundamental to geometry and to the structure of space-time. And perhaps the pyramid builders were trying to tell us that by indenting these faces just slightly. You can only see it on the equinox with the right lighting from above. When you're standing in front of the pyramid looking at this, you really can't see this indentation. It's a brilliant piece of engineering. You can kind of see it here on one side. So we still don't understand what exactly the pyramid does and why it was built, but there are very fundamental relationships that happen mathematically. It's expressing pi, it's expressing phi. I encourage you to check out the work of another Resonance Academy faculty member named Alan Green. And Alan Green has figured out that the Great Pyramid of Giza actually encodes over 80 physics constants. Everything from square root of 2, square root of 3, phi, pi, Euler constant, all these different constants. Even it expresses, I'm sorry to Rich Jarvis who made this slide. It's the wrong pyramid. It should be the Great Pyramid. That's the middle pyramid. Apologies to Rich, the great Rich Jarvis of Welcome to the Golden Page. Check out Welcome to the Golden Page. Great insights into the relationship of geometry and frequency and light. This is showing you that the inclination angle of the face of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is 5184, and then the apis angle, which is the corner edge angle of 41.99 degrees, are within the range of where you see a rainbow from the angle of the light hitting your eye. That could be a coincidence. I doubt it. Here's what I was describing earlier: the circumference, the outer circle minus the circumference of the inner circle, drawn in relationship to the base of the Great Pyramid, gives you the speed of light. And they were using cubits at the time, but how did they know to place the pyramid at this spot so that after the invention of longitude and latitude, somehow the latitude of the Great Pyramid turns out to be the speed of light? It's unbelievable. Doesn't seem like all these things could be a coincidence. The longest straight line you can walk on the planet without going over a major body of water is Western Africa to Eastern China, and Giza, where the plateau is, where the pyramid is at phi, at 1.6 to 1 golden mean on that line. Here's where they found the void above the Grand Gallery. This was thanks to the Scan Pyramids project, 3 different teams from 3 different countries with 3 different types of muon detectors, detecting muons that fly through the earth, don't interact with the matter of the earth, and fly out the other side. And then very occasionally they bump into some atoms, and you can catch those with very sensitive detectors. So they put detectors all around the pyramid and the outside of the pyramid and found a couple of different voids, one behind the original entrance, one that's about the size of the Grand Gallery, above the Grand Gallery. And then there's actually another one, a notch up here. Here's the Great Pyramid, like right up around in there, there's a notch that they found as well. So even just in 2017, they're discovering new things about the pyramid. And I have a feeling there's more chambers to be found. Check out the Real Da Vinci Code video made by Robert Edward Grant and Alan Green. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on their social media. And it shows that perhaps the Great Pyramid was encoded by Leonardo da Vinci in his Vitruvian Man. And the lines that you find on the Vitruvian Man actually map chambers. And there's other lines that are up near the head that might indicate chambers higher up in the pyramid that we have yet to discover. That is the theory anyway. Here's the Scan Pyramids project looking at this whole mapping that they did using 3D goggles and virtual reality. This is the muon scan that they did that shows that void. And this is the this is what they want to do, is send a little blimp through a little hole that opens up and it flies around that chamber and films it and then lands back on this pole, and they pull it through so they don't have to destroy the walls of the chamber. I went to Egypt with Nassim Haramein, here shown speaking in front of the middle pyramid in 2017. Here we are standing at these blocks in front of the Menkaure pyramid, the 3rd pyramid. And the blocks that Nassim is standing next to are about 80 tons. And the great Robert Schoch, who's a geologist that did the dating of the erosion on the Sphinx, dating it to perhaps 10 to 30,000 years, he thinks the erosion of these blocks that you see on the top layer, you see how the top layer is more eroded than the bottom layer, based on the amount of rainfall in the Giza Plateau, he thinks that these could be eroded for 80,000 years. And then anybody who's in archaeology or anthropology goes, wait, 80, there's no way that people could move stuff like that 80,000 years ago. Supposedly we didn't know how to farm yet. Like we didn't even know how to feed ourselves very well. But yet the anomalies are all over the world. And if you start going into the stuff in Peru and all over the world, you'll see that there's evidence that technology was advanced thousands of years ago. All bets were taken off when they found Göbekli Tepe, for example, in Turkey, which is 12,000 years ago. Gigantic, massive pillars that are many dozens of tons that were aligned with astronomical events. So the story we've been told of the ancient civilizations being primitive and not understanding very much and making up a bunch of stories about beings and all this stuff, a lot of that is probably not accurate. And it's probably a lot more complex than we've given the ancient cultures credit for. This is a stone at the base of the middle pyramid. That's a single piece of flooring. Why would you do this? Why would you build stuff with stones this big if it was that difficult? Maybe it wasn't difficult. Maybe they had some crazy technology that made it easy. Look at the scale of this thing. When you go and look at these stones, when you go to Machu Picchu or Ollantaytambo in Peru, when you go to Chichen Itza, when you go to the Great Pyramid, it just begs, like, how did they do it? Then they get into all these theories. Oh yeah, they had these platforms, they built platforms and they were pulling the rocks up like this, or they had a big ramp and they were pulling up these rocks up the ramp, except the ramp would have more stones in it than the pyramid to get it to the top. So we have no evidence that any of these theories work out. You can't just drag, hundreds of tons of rock on these ramps with vine ropes very easily. They told us that they were slaves that built this thing. Now they think, oh no, they were farmers. The biggest thing that we can lift is the bridge of a cruise ship, and this crane doesn't move. So moving very heavy objects is not as simple as just, this little pulley mechanism, and that there were maybe there were ramps inside the pyramid and they turned the corner by turning them with these pulleys and all this stuff. There's all these theories about how this stuff gets made, but none of them really account for physics. They floated the blocks on a giant lake and then they floated them up these chambers with water inside them. I love that theory. Then there's oh yeah, maybe they resonated the blocks with sound because we can make styrofoam balls float with sound, or water can float with sound. Or here's the best thing I think we've ever made float with sound. But this thing doesn't weigh very many grams. It doesn't weigh hundreds of tons. What was the real purpose of this? Christopher Dunn thinks it was a power plant. You can check out his book, The Giza Power Plant. Nikola Tesla may have known about this power generation property of the Great Pyramid, pulling electrical energy from the aquifers below the Great Pyramid, connecting it and channeling it and concentrating it out the top of the Great Pyramid. Maybe it was sending energy up and it could be seen from above, from space. Maybe it was creating an electrical field that they could get energy from. Tesla with the Weidencliff Tower in Long Island and send electricity wirelessly through the air to everybody. And of course, the power brokers at the time didn't want him to do that because they wanted to sell copper wires and telephone poles to people. That's how we ended up with the structure that we have today. But this might be pointing back to an ancient type of technology. Notice the Ark of the Covenant is in this picture. I won't have time to get into this, but the Ark of the Covenant, according to the Bible's dimensions, they lays it out in exact cubits, the same measurement system that they used to build the pyramid. The Ark of the Covenant fits in the sarcophagus in the king's chamber. Now, that could be a coincidence, but it's pretty accurate. It's pretty close. And there's the story of Moses taking the ark out of Egypt and getting chased with it. And the ark having all these properties and these kind of powers of being able to, take down the walls of Jericho and heal people. And if you weren't pure of heart in the eyes of the Lord, and you tried to touch the ark, you might die. So maybe it had an electrical charge to it. Maybe there's something here having to do with energy production. Maybe water came up from the aquifer into the pyramid and made a giant water hammer. That's an interesting theory. We know the ancients had advanced technology because we find the Baghdad batteries that are still have a very low level of electric charge. I think there was 13 of these found in Persia, I believe. We see this ionic current that forms just from structures that are pyramid shaped, whether it's the Great Pyramid or another. Here's a kind of a photoshopped version of the King's Chamber with the Ark of the Covenant in it. Robert Edward Grant was in the King's Chamber and noticed that there's an embossed Alpha Omega on the sarcophagus rim. This is a new discovery, very fascinating, and the geometry, the measurements of the embossed Alpha Omega itself relate to fundamental geometries having to do with the King's Chamber itself and the Great Pyramid itself. I don't have time to go into all of those details, unfortunately, but there are pyramids around the world. We're going to jump from Egypt now to China. And the Chinese government has planted spiky trees onto these pyramids because I don't think they want Western archaeologists to come in and discover an alternate history to Chinese history, as much as the Egyptians don't want to find out that maybe the Egyptians didn't build the pyramids, that the pyramids were built thousands and thousands of years earlier, and dynastic Egypt discovered the pyramids and said, oh, these are awesome, let's try to build something like that. And they started with the step pyramid in Saqqara, and then they did the bent pyramid and the red pyramid, and they got better and better. This is an alternate theory to Khufu built the Great Pyramid and his son built the Middle Pyramid, and Menkaure, his son, built the Third Pyramid. We don't know, but we can see that the Great Pyramids in Giza match the layout of these pyramids in China, which match the layout of the pyramids in Teotihuacan in Mexico, which match the layout of the orientation of the stars in the Belt of Orion constellation. This could be a coincidence, but it seems like it might not be. And if this isn't a coincidence, then the whole story that we've been told since we were kids about the evolution of civilization is incorrect, because these cultures had to have had either communication with each other or all had same communication with another civilization that was like, okay, here's the deal. Here's how space-time works. Here's how geometry is. Here's how energy works. Here's how you can harness energy with structure, with piezoelectric effective crystals, with massive granite columns, with tuning forks, i.e. obelisks. There's so much to unfurl here, and we're just starting to crack this open in the last couple of decades. Up until a couple of decades ago, these things were not being talked about very much, and dare you start to suggest that these folks that built all these pyramids, by the way, that orientation that I'm showing you of these 3 different sites happens between the sites themselves. If this is a coincidence, wow. Really? You guys just happen to lay your pyramids exactly like the stars in Orion's belt, and then these sites are also slightly off at that same angle on the surface of the Earth? Doesn't seem like a coincidence. Same thing with their traditions, right? This is like the grand gallery, the ceiling being this arch that is these steps to it. That creates a resonance of the frequency of the sound in that chamber. And then mummification is another thing that is not just in Egypt. They found mummies in China, Mexico, all over the place. Here's a Chinese mummy, right? You've got the Fu dog in China guarding the entrance to the Forbidden City, kind of like you have the Sphinx guarding the Giza Plateau. Both of them are said to have knowledge under their paw. Like Edgar Cayce said, the Hall of Records, the Akashic Records could be underneath the paw of the Sphinx. What is this Fu dog actually guarding? What's he got under his paw? Oh, it's a proton. It's a 3D flower of life showing you the fundamental space-time structure of everything, where protons are what make matter. And if this is the pattern of protons, then this is the pattern of all of our reality. All material structure is essentially 3D flower of life, little oscillations of Planck spherical units of oscillation at the Planck length, 1.616 times 10 to the negative 33 centimeters. That's a decimal point with 33 zeros after it, 1616 centimeters. It's so small that 10 to the 60 of them fit in a proton. And here we have the Chinese showing us this in detail. I've been showing this slide for years, and I finally got to go to the Forbidden City and get a better shot of this, of the same thing. I bought a selfie stick from one of the vendors so I could get my phone right up to it because there's a little fence around this thing. But boy, he's sitting on a flower of life fabric on a square pedestal with a square carpet that's turned at 45 degrees, creating a square on a square, like the windows of all of the cathedrals in Europe. So we find commonalities of geometry and field patterning in ancient civilizations around the world, from the ancient West to the ancient East to South America. All over the planet, we see similar geometries being encoded into ancient civilizations' architecture, their monuments, their documents, their traditions, their philosophy. And this is key, because right now on this planet, we have various, let's just say, orientations of faith. Call it religion, call it spirituality, call it culture, call it nationality, call it whatever you want. There's a lot of differentiation between belief systems of people on this planet. And when you get down to the essence of these belief systems and where they originated from, like the origins of, Taoism, the origins of Hinduism, the origins of Buddhism, the origins of Islam, the origins of Judaism, the origins of Christianity, all those religions encoded at some point in their tradition the fundamental pattern of the geometry of space-time in one way or another. Kind of like how all these different musicians in all these different cultures around the world play music, and all the music is different, but they're all using the same fundamental principle of sound and vibration and frequency to organize musical sound and create patterns in the vibration of the structure of the air that hits your ear, that you translate into electrochemical impulses in your neocortex, and you go, oh, cool, that sounds good. That's an incredibly complex process right there, but we're all operating in the same field. And so taking that lesson from music or dance or art, maybe everybody could pray in a different way, because it turns out that the Torah and the Bible and the Quran are all encoding the same fundamental information and expressing it in a different way. And if we could all land that as a culture, then the Israelis and the Palestinians can stop firing right now. You guys don't need to fight each other. There's no reason. It's all the same one thing. I'm getting really sad. Damn it. It's so frustrating to me, you guys. Like, I can see, thanks to the ancient civilizations leaving us all this stuff, that we're all in the same boat and we're all trying to figure it out together. And we all have different expressions. Like, I can play dubstep and somebody else can play bluegrass, and it's fine. And we're not going to shoot each other. Like, I don't like that style of music, maybe, or like, I don't want to do opera, or I don't want to do, death metal or whatever it is that I don't play. But I'm not mad at those people, right? Like, let them play whatever music they want. I don't care. Like, let everybody express themselves how they want. All this to say that I feel like if we look back at, and this is in the garden in the back of the Forbidden City, underneath an urn, here's another proton, basically, flower of life sphere. I showed this picture to Nassim and he goes, oh yeah, that's cool. They had to tie it down. I was like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. Like, maybe they had to tie this thing down because it floated on its own. Notice in all the entranceways of all the temples in Egypt, there's a sphere or a disc with wings. Sometimes it's a circle, but really on a nice archway or a nice entrance, it's concave. It's actually showing you that it's a sphere with wings. Really? A sphere with wings? So, you're saying that there were arcs that flew and they came from the sky, and the sun gods mentioned in the Bible had arcs and they could fly on magic carpets and things that were in the sky, like the Vimyanas in India are talking about these same kinds of ships. Maybe they didn't have the terminology for spaceships and they were describing it in the way that they could describe. So yeah, this is starting to go towards, that forbidden topic of, oh no, you're not going to start talking about information that came to our planet from not our tetra, from off of our tetra, off of our planet, extra tetra real information, what I like to call extraterrestrial information. Like, oh no, a physicist, a geometer, an anthropologist, an archaeologist is going to start talking about what? Extraterrestrials? No, you're insane. Now, thank you, Pentagon and CNN and the pilots that were not getting noticed. And so somebody went directly to Congress, and then Congress eventually was like, hey, Pentagon, we want a report on UAPs, unidentified or aerial phenomenon, or UFOs, which is now all over the news. Like today, this week, 60 Minutes last Sunday, what is this? Only 5 days ago, or 4 or 5 days ago, 60 Minutes, the most mainstream Western news program on the planet, did an extensive program on essentially UFOs and talking about what is going on. What are these Tic Tac devices? The most recent one, the video came out yesterday showing one of these Tic Tacs going into the ocean and the pilot going, look, a splash. So all bets are off, you guys. It's okay to talk about extraterrestrials now. Phew, because like Nassim Haramein started talking about this about 30 years ago, and he got banned basically from physics. The physics community was like, oh no, we're not looking at your equations because you're talking about extraterrestrials and that you're crazy. And Nassim knew that he's not crazy. And yeah, that we're not the only biology in the entire universe. I digress. I Ching, right? You've heard about this. How many hexagrams are there? 64. What are they made of? Either solid lines or broken lines. To make the geometry of space-time, you need 6 solid lines to make a tetrahedron and 6 broken lines to make the equal and opposite tetrahedron. Once you have 8 tetrahedrons, you can put 8 of those together and get a 64 tetrahedron grid. Oh, I do have a tetrahedron grid. Here's a 64 tetrahedron grid. To get to this geometry of space-time, I have to put it in front of me. This is 8 star tetrahedrons put together. And to get that most foundational geometric information, to build that is encoded for us right inside of yet another ancient tradition known as the I Ching. So this probably isn't a coincidence if this is there. And, you know, you can go into the Bible too and look and find the Tetragrammaton, which is made of the 4 letters of the great name of God in Hebrew, Yud He Vav He, which add up to the number 72, and that's one tetrahedron. But you put another tetrahedron there. 72 plus 72 equals 144. The 144 faces of God. How many faces are there on the outside of a 64 tetrahedron grid? 144 faces. So that doesn't seem like a coincidence either. Again, anything could be a coincidence, but when they all point in the same direction, the chance of that being a coincidence is beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's where I got with this, studying this, which is why I got on such a mission to try to explain this to people in presentations around the world for Resonant Science Foundation, for Nassim Haramein, and now I'm helping Robert Edward Grant and Alan Green to get their information out as well. All these guys are cracking various parts of the code of space-time itself. Here you see that a yin-yang is actually encoding for us the dynamics of a dual torus, which is basically a black hole. And the ancient Chinese had known this. Obviously, they encoded into their I Ching. They encoded it into the yin-yang. And here we see an I Ching written in a sunflower phi spiral pattern. This is found in the Shanghai library. Somebody on Facebook saw this, took a picture, sent it to me. I really appreciate that. Whoever sent that to me, I forget your name, I apologize. But we see this pattern everywhere in ancient civilizations, including the flower of life on the side of the rock here in the temple of Osiris, the Osiris temple in Abydos. This is down several hundred kilometers from the Giza Plateau, down the Nile Valley. This is very strong evidence for advanced technology. Notice the ceiling blocks are about the size of these columns, which have been estimated to be over 60 tons. And the ceiling was 2 stones thick. You can see in the back there that it was double layered. And so a lot of these stones are missing now. But I don't know if you can see it very clearly, but at the bottom of the stairs there, if you go to the right, you'll see that the stone sitting on top is tongue and groove on top of the other stones, which means they had to lower that. It's not like they could just get it up there just barely and then slide it over. They had to lower 160-ton, stones before the invention of the pulley, before the invention of the wheel, supposedly. How were they doing this? We don't know, but the evidence is there that they had advanced technology to be able to somehow construct this temple. It's so old that it's been buried over geologic time by the sands of the desert. And it was only later discovered and dug out. Seti the first found this temple and said, wow, this is epic. I want to build my temple right next to this. So his temple is up on the surface of the sand where it is now, right next to this, which is down below. And, you know, traditional Egyptologists say, oh, isn't that cool? They dug a hole and built a temple.
Jamie,
Not
you have like
realizing
2
that
minutes,
this
brother.
is, okay, not realizing that this is way older than dynastic Egypt. So I highly encourage you to check out this site, because this is where you find these blocks that look like they're pillows, that are puffy, that are perfectly cut and perfect aligned. And if you just looked at this wall standing here in Egypt, you would be like, oh, I'm in Peru. And you're, wait, I'm not in Peru. This looks exactly like Peru. So we find these kinds of constructions all over the planet. This is that column, which at the top of the column on the left face there, you can see 2 flower of life symbols. I was lucky enough to get down there right before the sun went away, and I got this shot in the last moments of light. The first time I got to go there, it was quite a feeling, because I've shown these pictures again for years in presentations, and I was happy to be able to get there and stand there. This is what it looks like when you're standing right underneath them. They're quite high up. There is Greek graffiti that you can see around the corner, but it's much thicker. And so here you see Nassim Haramein standing with the great Egyptologist Muhammad Ibrahim with a cast on his arm, because he had broken his arm at this time. This is in 2017, fall of 2017. And then you've got Foster Gamble in the hat behind him. He's the guy who did this Thrive and Thrive 2 documentary. I recommend checking those out, the Thrive movement. This is the graffiti around the other side. This is the flower of life. And notice how precise it is and how detailed it is. The ancient symbol happens to perfectly match the theorized geometry of the fabric of the vacuum, quantum vacuum fluctuations by a unified field theorist, Nassim Haramein, in modern times. That could be a coincidence, but it's doubtful. It's doubtful. Here's the quantum gravity and holographic mass solution that Nassim Haramein came up with, showing that there's 10 to the 60 Planck spherical units on the inside of the proton, and there's 10 to the 40 that terminate with flower of life tiling patterns on the outside. Each one of them has a quantum wormhole that goes off the proton and connects to 10 to the 40 other protons. And this is the quantum wormhole fabric that connects space at all scales, from the quantum to the cosmological, so the universe can talk to itself and keep its coherency and learn more about itself over time. So ancient Egyptians, ancient Chinese, ancient civilizations all over the world knew space-time geometry. And there you have it.
Beautiful, brother. Thank you so much, Jamie.
Thanks, Neil.
Beyond epic, brother. Just the way you deliver all that information and how you can fit it all into such a concise time and still explain it so well. I really appreciate you, man. Thank you.
I've had a lot of practice. You know, it's like playing drums.
Yeah.
And when you first start playing drums at a party when you're in junior high school, and you go do gat do cat, people look at you like, what are you doing? They all stop dancing. And you're like, oh, right, I have to like keep this going. Right. So as a drummer, when you're doing a presentation on Zoom, you want people to be like, okay, boom, boom, boom. You don't go.
Exactly.
It's hard to fit it all into a short time, though, because as you can see, each one of these civilizations, you could do like 8 hours just on one site. You could do 8 hours on one building. Right?
Exactly, dude. Which is why we're doing another event with you, which is going to be what is this? September 4th. Not for a few months, everybody, but we're going to be bringing Jamie on for a workshop. It's probably going to go over 2 hours because you usually do, but I have it down for 2 hours there, and you can get more of Jamie Janover. Excited for this one, brother.
Yeah, Jamie,
yeah, and you know, I've got a whole bunch of stuff on Portal to Ascension from past talks too.
Yeah, lots of stuff.
Jamie, we had
a link in the chat, actually.
Interesting question come up in the YouTube chat, and that came up when you were talking about the pyramids being dynamited. The question was, how did they know where to dynamite the pyramid to begin with, and did they get it on the first try?
It's hard to know the answer. I don't know exactly the answer to that, but I would guess that there was some indication on the outside that there was probably an entrance there, because maybe the casing stones looked a little different. I've always wondered that myself, but If you're going to go there and like you have the time and the effort to start dynamiting the thing, you probably do a pretty full-on investigation to figure out where you want to start digging first to try to find. And I think they blasted and got to that point where they saw those chevron stones, and that's where they were able to first go in. I'm not exactly sure the history of why it eventually got closed off. I was able to go walk up to those chevron stones last year. I was in Egypt in March or in February of last year, right before COVID hit. I got back to the United States about a week before the declaration of pandemic hit. So I was fortunate to get in and out of that. But during that visit at night, I was able to walk up to that chevron with Alan Green, and we looked for, I didn't have time to show all this, but Alan Green's course in the Resonance Academy, the Shakespeare game, is going to cover this. There's an incredible inscription up there right underneath the chevrons. Like it's kind of like a little seat. And it has the name of God essentially in ancient Coptic script embossed into the rock. So it's a profound spot right there. And I'm curious to see if they're going to allow people to go and try to find the void that is supposedly right behind that entrance.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that answer, Jamie. Appreciate it.
Jamie, appreciate you, brother. If you could stick around and maybe read some comments in the chat. I know there's a lot of people engaging there, but I really appreciate you. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure. So you're talking on YouTube?
No, in Zoom, but definitely on YouTube as well. We have like
in
70
Zoom.
people on YouTube, but in Zoom right here, there's a lot of people leaving comments. So if you can stick around and read them, that'd be awesome.
Great.
Okay.
Well, thanks for having me. Keep it up. You guys, Neil is just like such holding it down so hard for this community, and the number of presentations that he's hosted and the amount of information he's been a part of propagating through the internet is phenomenal. So
That's crazy.
Serious props to Neil, everybody. Support
you.
Portal to Ascension. We need more folks like you helping to move everything forward. So thank you again.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you, man.